Nearly 50% of American pastors say they struggle with burnout and have considered quitting in the last year, believing that a fresh start somewhere else may be just what they need. Well, what if you didn't have to go somewhere else to get a fresh start? What if you could press a reset button on your life and ministry right now and create a fresh start right where you're at? Well, I believe you can, and today I want to share 5 steps you can take to get unstuck and give yourself a reset and move forward in your life and work. That's all coming up in this episode of the More Than a Pastor Show. Let's get started. What's up, my friend? Welcome to the More Than a Pastor Show. I'm Rich Avery, your host. This is the show where we help pastors, missionaries, and other ministry leaders to grow your income and build financial security. We'll help you take your skills, experience, and ministry know-how and leverage them into sustainable income outside the church through a business or a side hustle that's right for you, so you can serve God and provide for your family no matter what. Hey, how are you doing this week? I hope you're doing well. Where I live in Michigan, we're getting the warmer weather again. Spring is here, and we're so excited that the cold temperatures seem to hopefully finally be behind us. On May 1st, we had snow, and some parts of Michigan got 2 feet of snow on May 1st. Thankfully, that was not my area of Grand Rapids. That was up in the Upper Peninsula, but the snow is beyond and behind us now. Hopefully, please, Lord, and we're grateful for warmer temperatures. Hope it's great where you are and great for you as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me each week and today. If you're new to the show, though, maybe you want to learn more about me and check out the show notes for today's episode and download some free resources to help you grow your income and build financial security. You can find all those things on my website at morethanapastor.com/57 for episode 57. Being a pastor in a local church should be a rewarding and fulfilling calling, right? And for much of the time, it is. But the constant demands of ministry can also be incredibly stressful and draining, leaving many pastors to feel burned out, overwhelmed, and even stuck. A 2022 survey by Barna reports that 42% of American pastors say they've struggled with burnout and have been thinking about quitting in the last year. Can you guess some of the biggest reasons why? Well, if you're one of these pastors, I'm sure you could. Here are the top 3 reasons why pastors are feeling burnout and are thinking of quitting. First reason, number 1, is stress. In fact, 56% said it was the immense stress of the job that was leading them to quit. And I'm sure that the added stress over the last 3 years with COVID as well have been one of the biggest factors why so many pastors are just burnt out and tired and looking to move on and do something different. Reason number 2 is isolation, and 43% said, I feel lonely and isolated. Have you experienced that yourself, or do you know other pastors who are feeling lonely and isolated? You know, I hear that from many pastors, and I think it's ironic because as pastors, we're surrounded by people in our church. We've got leaders that work with us. We have the congregation. There are dozens or maybe hundreds of people around us. But sometimes we feel like there's no one in our corner. There's no one who really understands what it's like to be a pastor, to lead a church. Maybe no one that we feel like they're a safe person that we can talk to about our real feelings or struggles or things like that. And if that's where you are right now, I want you to know, Pastor, that I am in your corner. I believe in you. I love you. I want the best for you. And if you need someone to talk to, I want to be that person to just be able to listen as someone who has been there, who gets it, who understands to some extent, and who wants to see the best for you. And so I'll share later in this episode how we can get in touch, but I want you to know right now that if you are struggling and just are feeling burnout and need someone to talk to, let me be that person. And I want to give you permission that I don't think you need it, but I want to give you permission to do what you need to do to provide for your family, to work out your schedule, to find the balance and the the rhythm that you need in your life to help you to stay healthy. We're going to be talking a little bit about more in this episode about some of the ways you can give yourself a reset. And if you're not happy with how things are going in your life and ministry right now, I believe there are some things you can do to change it. You might feel like things are hopeless, that there's nothing else you can do here besides resigning and moving on and maybe starting over fresh somewhere else. But I really believe there are some things that every pastor can do to give ourselves a reset. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Number 3, the third reason why pastors say they're burnt out and are wanting to leave their church is political division. And 38% said that current political divisions were the big reasons why they were considering stepping away from their church. I totally get this one too. And if that's where you are right now, I'm with you. I understand that. It's a crappy time right now with the political situation that we're in and with the tribalism and the division, and not just like governmental politics, but even church politics. You know, my undergrad degree was in political science, and people used to joke and say, well, how's that serving you as a pastor in a church? And I said, well, you know what? It wouldn't at all, except that there is politics in the church, and maybe you have experienced that. In fact, I've talked a lot in previous episodes of how I think political divisions are one of the biggest reasons why younger generations are leaving the church today. They're really tired of seeing Christians fighting against each other or against the culture and trying to legislate morality or trying to make this a Christian nation and trying to conform the culture to some kind of a biblical standard through politics. And people are they're just thinking that that's not what the church should be about. That's not what Christ was about when he was on earth. And so people are really kind of checking out of church in part because of the political divisions that we see. So again, let me just recap those. Stress was 56%. 56% of pastors said stress was the biggest reasons why they were wanting to quit and move on. Isolation was number 2 at 43%. Political division was last, third at 38%. Personally, it's sad for me to see how so many pastors come to a point where they feel like they no longer have control over the things that they ought to be able to control. You know, we can't control everything that happens to us or isn't that we're engaged with in our churches, but there ought to be some things that we as pastors do have control over, do have a say over. And I think a lot of pastors are struggling right now that they feel like they can't control their attitude, they can't control their schedule or their energy or the expectations of the role that they're in, or even relationships that they thought they could trust that now seem to have gone away. And sometimes pastors get to a point where the easiest way to fix all the problems is, in their mind, is to move on and go somewhere else. Maybe I've done all that I can here at this church. It's time to go somewhere else and get a fresh start. And I certainly can understand why people would feel that way, because change can be extremely difficult. And sometimes we realize that the problems that we face are of our own making. Maybe it's things that we've neglected over time, and all of a sudden now they've become a big problem, like with our health. We can eat the wrong things and not exercise or whatever, and we can think that's fine until all of a sudden change is forced upon us because of a serious health crisis that we're in. Or maybe we've neglected to do something that we should have done. We should have had this conversation with someone a long time ago, or we should have made this decision, and because we didn't, we're living with the regret and the consequences of not having made a tough decision back then, which could have made things so much easier for us today. And maybe we're ashamed to admit it, that we missed the boat and missed the mark on something we should have done some time ago. I think also we feel bad because we've allowed things to exist for so long that they feel normal. Habits that we cannot break, or things that are going on that we've just accepted for so long that now we just think that's because that's the way it is, that's the way it's always going to be, and we feel like there's nothing we can do to change it, or the price would be too high to try to change it right now. Again, it would have been better if we had addressed it Years ago, the price would have been a lot less at that point, but now so many more people are affected, or more dollars, more zeros are attached to the decision. Or maybe we feel like we don't have the emotional energy to change the expectations that need to be changed, or to have difficult conversations with board members or staff or volunteers or others that are involved. And I get that too. Emotional energy is an important thing. And if we feel burnt out, if we feel tired, if we feel like we don't have the energy to have these conversations, that clearly is a problem, and we need to get help with that. And sometimes I've been here, we just keep hoping and praying that things will change on their own, right? Like, okay, if I give it enough time, people are going to forget, or people are going to move on, or whatever. But hoping and praying isn't a strategy to help us. It's important. We need to have hope. We need to pray about situations, but what has God already equipped us to be able to do in terms of making decisions or having conversations? And so praying and hoping aren't strategies, but sometimes we do that. We hope that things will just get better on their own, and sometimes maybe they do, and sometimes they don't. There's a quote from Winston Churchill that's always fascinated me. I found it to be interesting, and it kind of relates to most easily. The quickest application is in regards to buildings, especially church buildings. Now, Winston Churchill wasn't talking about churches in particular when he gave this quote, but I think it's relevant for churches and the work and life of pastors as well. So listen to these words from Winston Churchill. He said, "We shape our buildings. Thereafter, they shape us." We shape our buildings. Thereafter, they shape us. Do you have an idea of what he's getting at here when he is saying that? What's his point? To me, he's saying that we take a small amount of time to maybe just a couple of months, in fact, to design a building and give it the form that fits the function that we want this building to have. And we have in mind now, if we're building a building like a church building, for example, we want a new sanctuary or fellowship hall, we have in mind today what we want to do with that building, but we don't fully understand what it could be used for in the future or how times will change. So we basically just have our own mind we have our own view of what it can do for us today and what we think it could do in the future. But we take some weeks or some months to plan what we think this building will be used for. But after it's built, it's with us for decades. It's with us for some churches are over 100 years old in America by now. And of course, in Europe, we know there are some churches over 1,000 years old. And so these buildings last with us forever. But we only took a small amount of time to envision what they could be used for and what kind of form we want to give the building. And so now that form, it impacts how we use it. Because at first we had in mind how we want to use the building, but now that we have the building, now it tells us how it wants to be used. And sometimes then that limits us because there are new things we want to do. 30 years down the road, there's new things we want to do in our building, but our building it constricts us and it limits us to what we can do in some senses. So I think that's what Winston Churchill was getting at here. We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. We have in mind the form that we want to give the building so that we can do the function that we want it to do. But then later, our function, what we do, is constricted or limited because of the building that we've created. I think that's true in our lives and ministries as well. We take on a position, we create or we accept a certain set of expectations, maybe rhythms, schedules, goals, and procedures that will enable us to accomplish the work that we're called to do. But then those things can end up dictating the way we work for years to come, unless we're able to adapt and to change the expectations and the rhythms and the schedules and the goals and procedures that no longer work for us as our reality changes. And I think that's where many pastors find themselves being stuck. because things have changed and we want to adapt and pivot and change to the current reality we're in now. But we're stuck with the expectations, with the goals, with the buildings, the functions, the job description that we had from years ago, and we don't feel like we have the power or the permission to be able to change them. Maybe because there's a board member or some other layer of leadership that holds us back and keeps us from accomplishing that. And so we feel like the only way to make the kind of change that we want to change or need to change is to leave the church and to start over at a different church. If that's you, can I invite you to consider something for just a moment? What if you didn't have to go somewhere else to get a fresh start? What if you could press a reset button on your own life and ministry right now and create a fresh start right where you're at? You know, when computers and other electronic devices get stuck in a pattern that they're not functioning correctly, there's a button that we can press that shuts it down and allows it to restart. And while humans don't exactly have a reset button like that, I know there are things I believe we can do to give ourselves a reset and to change how we're functioning or how we're operating. So today I want to share 5 steps for giving yourself a reset when you're feeling stuck, frustrated, or overwhelmed. And I think these are 5 easy things that we can do that can help change our perspective, our feelings, and help us to get moving and to move forward toward the life and the work that we really feel most called to do. So step number 1 is to remove yourself. Take a step back from the situation, catch your breath for a minute, and just taking a step back and removing yourself from the current situation you're at can help you gain clarity and perspective on the challenges that you're facing. So maybe you need to get away and go somewhere for a while. Maybe take that Sabbath rest you've been needing to take, or a day away with God, or just a half a day or a day just to get away and do something that kind of fills you up and makes you feel great. And I think that's one of the reasons God's given a Sabbath each week, and why sabbaticals can be so powerful for pastors as well, every 7 years or so. This gives us a rhythm of resting and recharging and renewing ourselves. Step number 1 was to remove yourself. Step number 2, review the situation and try to get a fresh look at where you're at. What's going on? Where are you stuck and why? And who else is involved in the situation? And also with that, what is this costing you? Think about the time, the frustration, maybe the emotional, the mental baggage that's created with that. Is it holding you back personally? Is it holding your family back or your church? Think about the cost of the situation where you're at right now and the cost of you not addressing it or trying to overcome it or move forward or eliminate it from your situation right now. So step number 1 was to remove yourself. Step number 2 was to review the situation. Step number 3 is to reframe the problem. Reframe the problem. Sometimes how we see the problem is the problem. That was something one of my mentors, Don, had shared with me many years ago. And what he was getting at there was that it's a matter of perspective. And as pastors, we see that in counseling many times, don't we? People come to us with a problem, and then we quickly realize as we learn more about the situation, as they describe the problem to us, we realize, okay, that's not your problem. I see why you think it's your problem, but that's not really your problem. We see that with spouses all the time, with marital counseling, where the wife thinks the husband's the problem, or the husband thinks the wife's the problem, but it's like, you're both the problem. Like the other person is not your problem, but there's other things at work here that are the problem. So it's important for us to look at the situation and to get a good feel for what it is, and to really try to see it with the perspective that we need to see it at. And as we're reframing the problem, we're asking ourselves, well, what did we believe was true about the situation? And do we feel that that's still true today? Is that valid or not? And then we can ask God and others to give us insight into whether we have the proper perspective on our situation or not. I love these insights that Tina Seelig shared in her book, Inside Out, Getting Ideas Out of Your Head and Into the World. She shares 3 steps for how we can reframe our problems. Step number 1 is to rethink the question. For example, one question that we have is maybe we struggle to live on the income that our church pays us. And so our question maybe at first is, well, how can I get the church to pay me more money? And then with that question, our answers are kind of limited because the church's ability to pay more is limited. But what if we rethought the question? And instead of asking, how can I get my church to pay me more? What if we asked, how can I earn more money? All of a sudden now we have dozens of solutions. We could take on an extra job. We can sell our things. We can start our own business or side hustle. There are dozens of things inside and outside the church we can do, but we didn't think about those until we rethought the question and made it broader or got a different perspective on the question. Okay, step number 2 that Tina Seelig shares is to brainstorm bad ideas. I love to brainstorm, and I believe that ideation or the creation of ideas is one of the biggest gifts the Lord has given me. But for every great idea I come up with that I or someone else really loves, I've come up with dozens or hundreds of bad ideas. And you have to do that, don't you? You have to go through all kinds of, if you're going to take the time to think, you think up all the bad ideas, and eventually you find a gem that's like worth its weight in gold. And so I feel that many of us, we kind of short circuit ourselves because we don't take the time to brainstorm like that. Or we think we have to vet each idea right away as we think of it and kind of, think it through or poo-poo it. And so I say, just start making a list, just start brainstorming, and don't try to correct anything or don't prejudge an idea whether it's good or not. Just start writing a list of dozens of ideas that could be possible or relevant to the situation, and then just see what God does and what gems He might provide for you that really would be worth looking into more. And I think the act of brainstorming and writing down all these kinds of ideas will help lead us to the best idea that'll really help us be able to move forward toward the life we want, the work we want, and whatever goals we have as well. The third step that she shared in her book was to unpack your assumptions. She said we all need to question our assumptions from time to time. Many times pastors and churches have certain assumptions that pastors should be content with the money the church pays them, whether they can live on it or not, that poverty comes with the territory of being a pastor. In unpacking the assumptions that you have, maybe like those or maybe like others, can help you to turn those assumptions on their head. And if you can envision the opposite of your assumption, it just helps open your eyes to new ideas or possibilities. And this can be hard because we've got assumptions that have been deeply ingrained within us. Like I had one years ago that was given to me by a pastor mentor who said, if you can see yourself doing anything other than being a pastor, you should go do that and not be a pastor. The assumption there was that if God calls you to be a pastor, it's a neatly defined, fixed set of expectations of what that looks like. And that may have been true for that pastor, but that's not true for every pastor. Not every pastor is in a full-time role in a church, and that's the only thing they can do. God's given all of us skills, talents, abilities, and things that no one job or ministry, as great as they are, will tap into. And sometimes we need to look for ways to earn extra income to provide for our family outside of our church. And I believe that's going to be more and more commonplace, that more and more pastors will derive their income mostly from work outside the church through their own business than being paid by the church. And so I'll talk more about that. And I've obviously talked a lot about that on this show in previous episodes. But we've got these assumptions, and many times they're false. We need to question them and be able to create new assumptions that will guide us and help us to move forward. And the ability to reframe problems will be key for our survival as pastors and in churches going forward, I believe. Our world is rapidly changing, our culture is changing, and many long-held assumptions are being questioned. Would you agree with me? And I believe with that, new pathways are going to need to be created. For example, I'll give you one assumption I think many church leaders have today regarding young people leaving the church is that they're leaving because they're rejecting truth and they're abandoning their faith. I believe that's a false assumption, but many are making it. What if they're rejecting false certainty? What if what they're abandoning is not their faith, but institutionalized religion, institutionalized Christianity, or maybe churchianity, not Christianity? So I'm saying that we have assumptions and they make us take actions, but those can be, if our assumptions are wrong, then we're doing totally the wrong actions and they could be hurting more than helping. And so having the right assumptions, having a clear understanding, being able to reframe the problem and to unpack our assumptions is going to be key for us to move forward with success in our life and work. So if you're feeling stuck or burnt out, look at the questions and assumptions you have and that your church have about your role and about your schedule and about the duties you're supposed to have and what times you're supposed to be available. And maybe you're preaching 50 weeks a year right now, but you could preach 38 or 40, but you feel like the expectation or the assumption is you've got to preach 50 and take 2 weeks off or whatever it might be. I think you get the idea that it's time to question those long-held assumptions, and maybe that can help us to get unstuck and moving forward in our life and work. Okay, so those were the 3 things shared by Tina Seelig from her book Inside Out, and rethinking the question, brainstorming bad ideas, and unpacking your assumptions. And that was all part of my point number 3 of reframing the problem. So we've talked about removing yourself from the situation. That was step 1. Review the situation, step 2. Reframe the problem, step 3. And now let's go on to number 4, reimagine solutions. The process of reframing the problem can help us identify new opportunities and possibilities that we might not have considered before. And this gives us the opportunity to reimagine our preferred future. So if we're not happy with our schedule or our duties or the emotionally draining role that we have, then let's reimagine what do we want. And let's be clear about exactly what we want. I think sometimes we have an idea, we have a rough thing we want to see change, but we're not specific enough. And if we're not clear and specific about what we want, we're not going to hit it. And others will give us what they think we want, but it's not going to be it. So let's be clear, let's be specific, let's have clarity around exactly what we want to see in our preferred future regarding our schedule, our expectations for our role, how we derive our income. Get a clear picture in your mind's eye of exactly how you want things to be different. And then now let's make a list of the things that need to be changed. Look at where you're at today and where you know you want to be. Where are those gaps? What are the things that are missing? What are the things that need to be changed? Let's make a list of those things and also the people that would be affected by the change. And then last one, number 5, is to relaunch yourself with a new way of operating. Some of these decisions that we need to make to change our situation and our circumstances are going to be easy to implement because they just affect no one but ourselves. But there are probably a lot of things that will need to have some careful planning around and some communication around these things that need to be changed. I need to do some changes here in how I do these things to make me a better person, a better husband or wife, or a better father or mother, and a better pastor. And so be mindful of those things, be able to write them down and carefully think through and plan out how will these changes be rolled out? Will they be made? And how will they be first communicated to others that these things need to be made? Think about the people that will be affected the most and be sure that they are informed and even help them to be able to have some ownership and buy-in in the process as well. And so creating a strategy for how you want to relaunch yourself, I think will go a long way to helping you to be able to create and to enjoy the reset that you want in your life and work. So what do you think about these? Have you used any of these steps in the past to help you get unstuck and moving forward in your life and work? Or do you see how these possibly could help you in where you're at right now? Or is there another staff person or another pastor that you know who needs a reset, and that these steps could help them be able to take that reset and not just leave and go somewhere else and think that those problems won't follow you there to the next place, but to see what you could do to reset your life and your work right now where you're at, and how to be able to do it in a healthier, more fulfilling, more successful way. Well, if this episode has helped you, I'd love for you to let me know. And one easy way you can do that is to share a review on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or wherever it is that you're watching or listening to this show. And just take a moment, let me know how this has impacted you, or take some time to share it with someone else. That would be a big help in helping me know how I'm doing, and if I'm creating content that's helpful for you, and then also it helps me to be able to share it with others who could benefit from the show. And if you wish you had someone that you could talk to about your situation, maybe you're wondering if you need more than a reset, or you feel stuck and you just don't know where to begin, or if having a reset is possible for you, or how to move forward in your current context, or even you're not even sure about what you really want. You know what you don't want. You know where what you got going on right now is not exactly what you want, but you're not sure what exactly do you want. Well, why don't you apply for one of my free coaching calls? That's what Josh did. He loved his current ministry role, but he felt stuck in a couple of important areas, and he wanted to get help. He wasn't clear about exactly what he wanted or about the best way to move forward. And so he reached out for a coaching call, and we were able to help him to clarify his goals and to identify his best next steps. And I'd love to be able to help you too. And it all begins when you apply for one of those free calls. And once I receive your application and see that your situation is something that I could help with, I'll reach out and we'll find a day and time that works for us to connect. We'll get to know each other, spend a few minutes doing that. And then I'll take some time to discover where you're at and where you want to be. And then together we can decide, am I someone that can help you? Does it make sense for us to work together to help you to achieve your goals? You can request that free call today at morethanapastor.com/coaching. Hey, I look forward to hearing from you and getting to know you and seeing how I can help you to create the life impact and income that you were made for. Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for joining me. It's really a blessing to have you here, and would love it if you could help to let others know if you find value in this show. Share it and help others to know about it as well. If you missed any of the links I mentioned earlier in the show, don't worry. Just head over to my website, to my blog and show notes for this episode. You'll find that at morethanapastor.com/57 for episode 57. Until next time, remember that you are more than a pastor. And saying yes to God's call doesn't mean we have to say yes to feeling stuck, broke, or unfulfilled in our life and ministry. Let's work together and help you create the life, impact, and income that you were made for.